So my name is David Moloney. I'm from Lowell, and I've lived in Lowell my whole life. I grew up in the Pawtuckaville area, and I went to Lowell Public Schools, and I now live up on Christian Hill, right near Ken. So um, I could probably hit a golf ball to his house if I worked on my game a bit. But I'm a teacher at Southern New Hampshire University. I'm an instructor of English, so I teach creative writing, fiction, poetry, nonfiction, advanced creative writing, and I also teach composition and rhetoric at that school. I started teaching at UMass Lowell a few years ago as an adjunct, but uh, I was able to get full-time work at Southern New Hampshire, even though UMass Lowell is, a mile from me. But um, I don't mind working in New Hampshire, and it's interesting that I'm back working in Manchester because that's where I worked as a corrections officer in my early 20s. I worked at Valley Street Jail in Manchester, which is part of Hillsborough County, the largest county in New Hampshire. And I worked there for 4 years from when I was 22 to 26. And a lot of the experiences I dealt with, I sort of parlayed into this book. And Barker House is a novel that it's fictional, but a lot of the stories, experiences, characters, they're based in sort of actual events, things that happened to me or that happened to people that I worked with. And I sort of decided to write the book during my master's program in 2015. And when I first started writing the book, I wanted to write sort of a fictionalized narrative about my experience, my short career, sort of what made me want to work there, because I had never intended to work in law enforcement until it just happened, and then what made me leave and sort of pursue teaching. And when I started writing that book, it was a really dense, heavy novel. It's sort of the uh, along sort of um, following of one person, and it was really boring. And I had a few of the early readers tell me that it was boring, and so I had to think of a different way to approach it because prison literature and this kind of writing is can be difficult to keep somebody's attention for a while. So I read a lot of books that use linked short stories. So every chapter is a short story, but when you read them all together, they tell a connective narrative. And so it's called a novel in short stories is really the structure. And that was kind of difficult to pull off. And so I started writing the short stories, not thinking about the narrative links yet. And then I found a few characters that held the whole book together, and I spent more time focusing on them. And so I wrote the book in about 9 months, and then I spent 2 years um, changing the links and the characters and making sure that they all lived in the same timeline. So the book takes place over the course of 1 year, and so you can see the seasons change, and um, but every single chapter is told from the point of view of a corrections officer, and that's a bit of a change from a lot of prison literature, which is told from the inmate's point of view, or people who are incarcerated. And so this sort of was a different viewpoint into the criminal justice system, which for somebody that worked in it, I could see how broken it was and is, and still sort of. So my idea was to not make this a political book, but uh, I think that I was being naive by saying that because I think most, if not all, art is political, and so I think that was maybe me just trying to pretend like I was staying in the middle, and I think I did. I just told an honest story of what it's like to work at a jail, and sort of readers are taking what they want from that. So a lot of people are reading it with a different lens that are sort of anti law enforcement or pro law enforcement. So there were good officers in the book and there were bad officers in the book, and that's true to real life. I think we know that in corrections and with police. So the power struggle that a lot of people face when we give them power, and that's sort of something I struggled with when I worked there because I was 22 and I was still sort of molding myself, my personality, and to be giving a lot of power, that was something that I had to sort of, no one taught me what to do with that. You had to learn on your own, and that was something that sort of in I quickly learned the type of officer I wanted to be, but I could have been either way. A lot of the power we were giving, we were allowed to do what we wanted to, especially with a private jail. So private jails can run on their own rules for the most part, and they run on low budgets. So the conditions were really poor. If you look up Valley Street after this, you'll see, if anyone knows anything about Valley Street, they're constantly being sued. They're constantly in the courts. Um, People do die in their care. So it's a very difficult jail, and they want it to be that way. They run it paramilitary. The inmates' beds have to be made tight. You have to be able to bounce a quarter off them, they'd say. And for some of the inmates, they were homeless for the last decade, and they come into a place where they're expected to be clean, hygienic, um, almost like a soldier in boot camp, and to hold them to those standards was tough. So just a lot of the things that they expected of us and the inmates were not realistic, and I wanted to show that through the book, and I think it comes through. So the book is out from Bloomsbury, so a large independent publisher. They're most well known for the Harry Potter series, and yeah, so I guess that's my spiel. I know I kind of went through it quickly, but I'm interested if anyone has questions.
Hey, Dave, can you speak a little bit to the process of actually getting published? This is your first book, right?
So I went traditional publishing. I know a lot of writers can do self-publishing. Now Amazon does order to print. So I started looking for an agent, and because a lot of the large publishers won't even read your manuscript without an agent. So I started looking at some of my favorite writers and who their agents are, and I started doing query letters. So you send a synopsis of the book to them, you tell them who you are, and then if they're interested in the book, they'll ask you for the manuscript. You can't just blindly send them manuscripts, or they'll get 5 or 6 thousand a week in their inbox. So they're very selective on what they want to read according to the market. So if they don't think they can sell the book, it doesn't matter if an agent likes it. If they can't sell it, they don't care. They don't want it, because they need to make money. So the agent liked my book, and I went to New York City and I met her, and she had a good plan for the book. So we signed sort of a deal that if she didn't sell the book within 3 years, I would be able to go find someone else. But we spent about a year together. She is still my agent, and I love her. She's great, and she sort of acted like an editor at the same time, and we worked together on making the book marketable according to the market standards right now and the trends. Publishing is very trendy. I know we saw a lot of like vampire books in like the 2000s, and then vampire books were gone and now they're coming back. So that's sort of just one example, but there is a big trend right now in immigrant stories that we're seeing that's coming out a lot right now. LGBTQ stories are sort of the trend right now. So it goes in waves, and something will come back and go away. But she thought that we had something with with the prison and the criminal justice system. There's a lot of talk about mass incarceration, private jails in this country. So she thought we hit on something there. And then we started, she started sending it out to publishing houses. So the good thing about having a knowledgeable agent, especially one in New York City where all the publishing happens, she knew which editors would be interested. So she wasn't sending it to an editor who likes, young adult romance, because that's not what the book is or was. So she knew exactly who would be interested if they were, and that helped sort of whittle the list down. And we sent it out in February. Well, what was that? 2017 and 2018. And the first few rejections we got, they said the material was too heavy and that readers wouldn't want to read that in fiction. Heavy material, readers usually want to read in nonfiction. And so they wished I wrote a nonfiction book. And so I kind of had a freak out moment, like, oh, I'm going to have to rewrite this book now in nonfiction, and that would be a whole different book. So we waited a couple more weeks, and then Bloomsbury responded, and we had sort of talks for 2 or 3 weeks back and forth with the editor, and we were sort of trying to figure out that they were going to stay true to the book. The worst thing I wanted to hear was, okay, we like the idea, now rewrite it, because I had spent 3 years on it already. I didn't want to go and rewrite the whole book again. But the editor said that she liked the book because there wasn't much to do. It was basically done. And so we did some light edits and changes. But when we sold it in 2018, so the publishing house puts a bid in, and we counted and then accepted the bid that they counted with. But then after you sign with them, it's a very slow process. It was another 2 years of sort of copy editing and choosing the cover and all that kind of stuff. And on their end, once they buy the book, they know it's not going to go on the shelf for 2 years, just the way the cycle goes. And for me, I was hoping to be on the shelf within a couple of months. I didn't realize 2 years was the timeline.
Wow.
It's probably going to go down as the worst time in history to release a book. It was supposed to come out in January this year, and then they pushed it to February, and then they pushed it to April. And we know what happened in early April this year and what's still going on. On the back of the book, they have the blurbs, and sort of we got some really good ones, like Andre Debus, who's a local writer and who's pretty famous, Elizabeth Strout, who's won 2 Pulitzers, Robin Wassman. And so I was hoping that people would pick up the book and say, ooh, this looks kind of cool, and they would see the back and then they would buy it. And so I was hoping for a lot of foot traffic, brick and mortar stores, and to have the 400 stores the book is in to just close overnight. And it's pretty tough. So I'm doing a lot of I don't know, strange promotions. I've been writing a lot of nonfiction essays about the jail, but it was either push it to come out before Amazon and FedEx stopped delivering, because it was kind of a scare that they were going to stop delivering at that point any books at all and just be delivering toilet paper basically. And so we decided to rush it out and release it a few days early. And the other option was to wait till next winter. And so that we would have had to wait another year. And Bloomsbury had already sent the books to all the bookstores, so we didn't want them sitting in boxes.